Okay, so the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was revealed at E3 in 2019. Then at E3 in 2021, it was revealed that the game was scheduled to release in 2022 and everyone was hyped. And around 1 month ago, Breath of the Wild 2 was delayed. And this has me worried for two main reasons. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about why I'm worried about the upcoming sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, I want to start off the video by saying that I think that Breath of the Wild 2 being delayed is a good thing. When games are delayed, it gives the developers more time to work on the game. Therefore, the game will probably be better. And I say probably as Cyberpunk 2077 was delayed 100 times and that game didn't turn out too good. I assume that the game being delayed also took a bit of stress off the development team's back. But there is a slight problem with Breath of the Wild 2 being delayed. When a game is delayed, people's expectations are going to be higher for the game than they originally were, which I think is completely fair. People are obviously going to assume that if a game spends more time in development than originally planned, that the game is going to be really good. So considering that people already have very high expectations for Breath of the Wild 2, as it's a sequel to one of the best games on the Nintendo Switch, now that the game has been delayed, people's expectations for the game are going to be even higher. And this kind of worries me, as when the game finally launches and people are putting the cartridge into the Switch, people are going to have such high expectations for the game that they'll be setting themselves up for disappointment. I'll be the first to admit that my expectations for this game are quite high, as Breath of the Wild is an incredible game, and I want to enjoy the sequel just as much. But I'm not going to let the game being delayed affect my expectations for the game. But I think a good number of people are going to have even higher expectations for the game now that it's been delayed, and that ain't a good thing. When Breath of the Wild 2 was delayed around 3 weeks ago, a whole new conversation began, with people saying that the Switch won't be powerful enough to run the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Now, in my playthrough of Breath of the Wild, I only found myself in 5 or 6 situations where the frame rate was kind of bad, but these frame rate dips only occurred when I was fighting enemies and it happened to be raining at the same time. I'm guessing this is because a lot of stuff was happening on the screen, but for the most part, the performance of Breath of the Wild was pretty good. But if Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be a considerably bigger game than the original Breath of the Wild, will the performance issues be more frequent? I assume that they will be, and that worries me, as if there are lots of performance issues that could ruin the game. There is some speculation floating around that Breath of the Wild 2 could have been delayed as it will be a launch title for a Nintendo Switch Pro, and this honestly does make a lot of sense. Breath of the Wild 2 has a huge amount of anticipation surrounding it, and so releasing it as a launch title for the Switch Pro would be a good idea. Plus, Nintendo could make Breath of the Wild 2 visually the best game on the Switch to help sell the Switch Pro, if that makes sense. Basically, what I mean is that in the advertisements for the Switch Pro, they could show off Breath of the Wild 2's incredible visuals to maybe entice some people to buy the Switch Pro and get rid of their regular Switch. But then what is even more concerning is that if Breath of the Wild 2 does release alongside a Switch Pro, it's safe to assume that the game will run well on the Switch Pro. But what about the regular Nintendo Switch systems? Is the game just not going to run well, and if you want a better experience, will you need to buy a Switch Pro? Hopefully that isn't the case, but you never know with Nintendo. So to quickly recap, Breath of the Wild 2 being delayed has me concerned for two main reasons, as not only are people gonna have really high expectations for the game, the plain old Nintendo Switch might not even be powerful enough to run the game well. And the video's done. Bye.